Now for a look at DHCP snooping, we're going to take a look at it and see it in action in a couple of labs I've never done in a course before. You're the first one to see these, and I know you'll get a lot out of them. But first, we're going to talk about whether DHCP snooping is for us or against us. And Guinness. Back to DHCP. Now, typical DHCP operation, simple enough, happens millions of times all over the world every single day in networks. Now, a host asks for an IP address. One or more DHCP servers hears that request, answers the request. The host is going to take one of those offers, get an IP address, default gateway, DNS server, things move on from there. How in the world can this be used against our network? Well, the problem begins at the very beginning of this process where the host sends out that DHCP discovery packet. And I don't care if you call it DHCP discovery or discover. I'm going to call it both just in this discussion just to get you used to it. The host then listens for replies in the form of offers, DHCP offers from the servers. Now, if the host gets more than one offer, the host uses a highly scientific, discriminating, and precise method and algorithm in order to choose the best address for its needs. It takes the first one it gets, or accepts the first one it gets. Not exactly the most highly scientific, discriminating, precise deal here, but sarcasm over, that's exactly what the host is going to do. And in this case, only one offer is coming back, so there's no big deal. The multi-layer switch forwards that to the host. Host looks at it, says, looks good to me, and we go from there. Now, among the values in that offer is the default gateway. Obviously an important value. No problem there, because only one DHCP server is responding in our network. Host gets the offer, sets its default gateway. But what if a rogue server gets into our network? What if a rogue DHCP server gets in our network, then starts sending offers out saying my default gateway is 100.111, and also that happens to be the IP address of the rogue server? Then everything is going to go through the host that isn't going somewhere else. That's the default gateway. Also, the rogue server could say, you know what? By the way, your DNS server, that's 100.111 as well. That gathers extra information. So this could be a really bad situation for us. Now that itself is not DHCP snooping. That's a DHCP attack, but the snooping is actually the defense against the attack, which we're going to talk about and then put into action. Because the switch is listening in or snooping on DHCP related conversations, and it makes decisions on which conversations are between trusted devices and which ones are not. So how do we get there? Well, again, this is what's basically going on. That multi-layer switch in the middle in this case is listening and saying, hey, I'm going to write all this stuff down. I want to know what discover messages are coming in. I want to know what offer messages are coming in. And I want to decide who's trusted and who's not. Well, you and I are going to have to do that because DHCP snooping classifies switch interfaces as trusted or untrusted. And the host in our example is going to send a DHCP discover message at the beginning of the process as it normally would and as we looked at earlier. But the switch is going to forward that message only through trusted ports. So assuming that ports 1 and 3 are trusted, this is what's going to happen. That rogue device is never even going to see the DHCP discover message. So it will not respond with an offer because it doesn't even know the discover message was sent. So that's a pretty good deal in and of itself. Then on top of that, DHCP server-related messages are only going to be accepted on trusted ports and then forwarded through them as well. So when this offer comes back through, it's only going to come in on a trusted port, be accepted on a trusted port, and it'll be forwarded out one as well. Now, what happens if the rogue DHCP server sends an offer anyway? There is a common misconception, so common that I myself fell for it. So I know there was a Cisco doc that said this once. Not the most grievous thing in the world, but most people think that this port that gets an offer on an untrusted port in DHCP snooping is going to go error disabled, and it will not. You'll see that live here shortly. When you will see that port go error disabled is if we set a packet limit on the port and that packet limit is exceeded, because that tends to indicate that the device is trying to flood the network. So in that case, the switch will say, okay, I'm shutting this thing down. But if you are only receiving an offer on an untrusted port, by default, that port will not go into error disable mode. The offer will simply be dropped. Now, as I mentioned, that decision to make a port trusted or untrusted, that's up to us. The switch is not going to make that dynamically or say, okay, I'm hearing DHCP messages, I'll trust these ports. Doesn't happen that way. But boy, here's something we better remember. By default, all ports on that switch are untrusted. So if you enable this feature and then all of a sudden nobody's getting any IP addresses, that's why. Because we better make some ports trusted or we will end up with no dynamic IP addressing at all. Enabling this feature, it's a three-step process. You're going to enable it globally. Then you have to identify the VLANs that will use this feature, because even while we are configuring ports, it's actually going to be performing the snooping on a per VLAN basis. And then finally you configure the trusted ports. That's all there is to it. Testing is an excellent idea with this. Now in the lab we're about to do, Router 2 already has an IP address that it has received via DHCP from a multi-layer switch. Don't worry, we'll do one from the beginning too, but I want you to see this renewal process. The switch between these two devices isn't running DHCP snooping yet. But take note of the IP addresses. We have connectivity here. We'll see the address Router 2 gets. We'll go forward from there, and then we'll start running DHCP snooping, trusting some ports, untrusting some ports. We'll debug DHCP, and we'll also see what's going on with that, whether or not the device can renew under certain circumstances. And that is all coming up next.